Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, the latest edition, where we talk about the confluence of community and technology with the hope to help improve everyone's life, especially everyday folks. I'm Stu Reed. I'm here with my special UBI, Universal Basic Income guest, Miss Diana Blackwell. She's the president of Fred Samuel Houses of PSA 6 Community Council and a community activist and champion for residents of Harlem. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we have Eno Schmidt from Basel, Switzerland. He's a co-founder of the Basic Income Initiative and the Referendum on Basic Income in Switzerland, author of the film Basic Income, A Cultural Impulse, and currently at the University of Freiburg in Germany, where it's helping to set up the Freiburg Institute for Basic Income Studies. Welcome, Eno.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, once again, UBI is back in the headlines. Universal, sometimes called unconditional basic income. And of course, it has taken on a new prominence. We've been talking about it for almost a year now on Communiy Technology here on WHCR-FM. But it's taken on an added prominence and importance with the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, both here in the U.S. and globally. And maybe, you can share with our audience just kind of an overview as to why it is important in today's environment. What's different now than maybe 6 months ago relative to UBI?
Well, it's important because we need more appreciation for each individual as a human being, because you are a human being. And I think this is necessary in our times, in particular, when artificial intelligence, digitization, automation, more monopolies will take over the power. We have to empower the people also even more to choose what their life is, to give them the chance for new biographies and the chance to do that work, what they really want to do, what they really value, and to contribute in a much better and efficient and effective way to society by their own understanding of what is needed. So this is the unconditional basic income. That's why it is unconditional, because it's the right to live in practice, and the right to live should be unconditional, given in appreciation that you are a member of our society and that you are a human being. Now, in the Corona crisis times, this topic comes up even more because so many possibility to have an income, to earn an income. And we all see, and that's globally, as you mentioned, Stu, it's globally that people understand more. It cannot be longer on that life of the people is totally depending on getting an income by labor, so being employed. This is too vulnerable. So we need a society which is more resilient, and it would be if everybody would have already a basic income high enough to live from, without condition, without strings attached, regardless of your life situation. So it comes up that this makes a society more resilient, more strong, keeps the society and the individuals more capable to take action. Our society would not be so locked down if there would be an unconditional basic income. And on the other hand, the basic income is purchasing power and keeps the economy running. So it comes up even more now everywhere that people say it would be good to have that. But mostly in our times now, together connected with Corona crisis, or let's say with lockdown, because that's a real crisis, that this is just for a short period of time, just in the time of this catastrophe, and it's only for those who need it. And this, I guess, is a difficulty longer on, that people cannot understand, cannot see that this is for the human being, this is for everybody, for every and each individual. It's longer on that people cannot see people. They need to see function, they need to see circumstances, and so on. it's difficult to understand that this is for human being and not for specific needs or things like that. And there could be a dark side of a basic income in that way, that it is used to keep the people at home, to keep them out of society, to keep them out of the labor market, just to say, here is a little amount, stay at home. So sometimes it seems to me that some advocates for basic income are a little bit naive, and they don't see that this corona crisis and lockdown primarily is a huge push for digitization, for more control, for minimizing civil rights, um, and for one world government. So the door is open for so many things, and one is unconditional basic income, because we need that. But that needs the engagement and the power of the people to bring that through.
You know, that's so true. You raised the issue. We were talking offline before the show started about the virus, and Diana, I don't know if you heard any of our earlier conversation, but Eno just touched on it, and that is because of the lockdown and the government reactions to the virus, we're looking at a potential biosecurity event or movement, if you will, where the pandemic and the health crisis is being used, if you will, say maybe even masking government action to invade privacy, to collect more data on people, to begin to evolve towards what Eno called a world government. Um, you know, and a couple of things just come to mind. One, you know, I was out with my wife, and we were somewhere at a public location where they were doing testing for the virus, and you were required to give up your driver's license and all of your personal data. And I said, Linda, I'm not doing that. And you know, one of the things that's clear is that, you know, they're putting together a national database of people. And, you know, one of the fears, you know, I look at the whole anti-vaccine movement here in the States. This is before COVID even was on the scene. And you had a lot of folks that were skeptical of the whole vaccine regimen. I think some for some valid health reasons. But on the flip side, what you had was states, that is, a government on municipal and state levels, starting to mandate kids couldn't go to school unless they had a particular vaccine, whether it be measles or whatever. And so I could see potentially where we might evolve to the point where you have to show your health care credentials in order to have access to work, access to shopping, access to whatever. And if you haven't been certified in terms of the appropriate healthcare regimen as defined by the government, you're ostracized and on the wrong side of the fence, if you will. And this is a little scary. And then you also see, you know, mentioned the moving towards a paperless money economy, where the money is being digitized more and more. And I think that's been accelerated because of the pandemic, where you have less face-to-face shopping and exchange of currency, more online shopping with digital currency, accelerating the movement towards the digital economy, probably on a global basis. And you know, it reminds me somewhat of the security reactions after 9/11, when there was so much hysteria generated around the so-called terrorists and the terrorist threat. And they basically decided that there was a permanent war on terrorism, that necessitated all kinds of draconian laws and rules around privacy and around eavesdropping, around data collection, around banking rules changed, around travel. I mean, travel became so much more controlled and restricted. And I'm seeing the kind of some of the same telltale signs appearing as a reaction to this health crisis. And unlike 911, this health crisis, one, it has no end that we know of, and it's also global. It's not just U.S., it's global. So it's a little frightening, and you pull back and look at some of the macro trends that are happening, and you wonder whether or not there's some other agenda going on behind the scenes, or in addition to just managing the healthcare crisis, if there's some other things going on in terms of managing populations. You guys are, Dan, do you have any reaction to that?
I have a lot of reaction to that, but what I'm going to talk about travel because that's very, very much heavily on my mind. It's like when you were talking about how travel is part of it. Now, if you travel, they're saying that they must, you must show that you've been inoculated. You're going to have to show probably on both ends that you've been inoculated. The control is so great that when you get to your destination, you're going to have to be quarantined. And once you're quarantined and you're released, they still follow you. You still have to check in. Wherever you said that you were going to go, they're going to check in. And it's happening already. So I can see this ultimate control over every aspect of your life starting now. Mm-hmm. So it's Big Brother is watching now. Mm-hmm. So we've entered into a whole new era. This is no longer the world that we knew yesterday.
Let me just interject. You're listening to Community Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM. And we're here talking about the UBI, Universal Unconditional Basic Income, with Diana Blackwell and Eno Schmidt. And we can't talk about UBI outside of the context of the pandemic that's going on. So that's where we are. So, Eno, do you have some other thoughts on some of the macro trends that you see in government as it relates to the pandemic? Yeah, you're in Europe. Let me just say for our audience, You're in Europe, so maybe you have a different perspective than us here in the U.S.
Yeah, in Germany and close to Switzerland. So the situation in Germany and also in Switzerland is more peaceful than in the United States now. We have little numbers of infections and deaf people compared to others. The measures of the government are strict, but it becomes more open, more free now. But what you said, Stu, I think that's very important and real. This is the same in Europe, like everywhere, that civil rights are limited. And I see that they will remain being limited. So that will become a little better then. People have the feeling, okay, it's better then, but it will not come to that point where it was. So it will be used, and I don't think about what is behind the scene. I just see what I see, that it is the same like that 9/11 attack, that civil rights are reduced, that freedom of speech is limited, and things are limited. You cannot bring critical articles about, for example, 9/11. You cannot say in Germany that coronavirus isn't so bad, that it's not a pandemic and all that stuff. That's not allowed. You can do it, you don't come in prison, but that is shortly before that. So I think we have, so the one thing is with coronavirus, and let's say not the virus is in your home, but the lockdown is in the home of everybody. So the lockdown is what touches all of us. And with that, we see things are possible from one day to the other, which were totally unthinkable, impossible before. government is spending huge amounts of trillions or billions of money and to the people, and sometimes without conditions, all that stuff. Companies get huge loans with guarantee from the state and all that stuff. So many things are possible if people want to do that, if the government wanted. So before we were told, oh, you have to have your job. That's the only thing. That's the only important thing. You are not valuable if you have no job and all that stuff. This is the goal. This is the meaning, the sense of your life. But from one day to the other, millions of people can't conduct their job, don't have an income. So many things are changing. And for those who are for, let's say, an unconditional basic income, it looks like, well, now is the opportunity, the window is open, the chance is here for implementing universal basic income. But you have to see that much more than this one interest, everybody has an interest, what they want to do, much more than this of an unconditional basic income. It benefits digitization, control, and all that stuff that you mentioned. And I think we are living in a time we have to take care and to be really open-minded that democracy is decreasing. So democracy is decreasing after the Second World War and all these horrible experiences. People wanted to come to a more open society and better situations and more democracy, in particular in Germany. And now what I see is we don't really know where should that go to. People don't fight for democracy even longer. They are convenient and they think like Trump or like other people's. If there's a strong man and he is doing the right thing, that's the best. I don't want to have this multicultural society or whatever. I don't want to interact with people from another opinion. And I think this is two things are important. One is democracy is decreasing. On the other hand, people are awake and want to go further, progressing in future, and unconditional basic income and more direct democracy and all that stuff is also working. But we have this both directions, two directions, I think. One is to be more controlled, to be global, more controlled, more in under one world government, more digitization, more monopolies. That's one line. And the other is, it's also globalization, but globalization of the human beings, to accept and to appreciate everyone, regardless of where you are living as a human being, and being together as one culture of humankind. So one human family, but not a control family, not a family because we are all controlled, we are all with the same government or something like that. I think individual to become more individual on the one hand, and to become more of a big machine. These are two directions. Both are strong, and both try to take their advantages and their chances.
And go ahead, Diana.
I'm hearing him speak about democracy, but I'm going to add that or ask a question when we're talking about democracy in the place where we are today in the world. Because of this pandemic, especially in the US, it didn't hit you like it hit us here. But in my area, we're talking about a democratic society which says that it's not equal with everyone. You have people who have suffered loss of jobs, loss of a lot of things. And then we speak about a UBI. But if the UBI is not or was not implemented at the beginning of this catastrophe that we're experiencing, how does this democracy adapt this UBI to bring everybody into an equal position? Do you understand that these people who have suffered are lagging behind? We speak of a system of equity, but you're way behind. How can this democracy really be a democracy when everybody's not equal? I don't know if you.
So I'm always saying on that question, an unconditional basic income is for everybody. This is totally important, not to look to the rich people as a rich and the poor as a poor. it's for everybody. It's the same amount. It's high enough to live from on a decent, on a modest level, but decent digital. Sorry, but this is not equality. This is just a basis. But then people have the opportunity because they don't depend absolutely on paid jobs. Today, you cannot do so many things because you have to go to your work, you have to have your job, and there are only a very few happy people who are really doing what they want to do. With non-conditional basic income, so many people can act for what they want to change in society, becoming actively in democracy, in developing democracy, in looking how can we bring together the rich and the poor again, how can we close the gap between, how can we come to more equality. An unconditional basic income is not the change, it is a basis to enable people to make the change. And if you look to history, always it depends on the people. It doesn't come from the sky. It depends on what people are really doing. And an unconditional basic income is so important for me because this is giving the basis to have an insured livelihood with no strings attached. And you can do what you really want to change, for example, to help others, to become active in politics or starting new forms of enterprises, not just profit driven, but also social driven. You can act differently. You can find your biography. You have a chance for your biography and for many changes that are needed in the society. This is not at first hand the unconditional basic income. But you see how difficult it is to think that it's unconditional and for everybody. The solutions will be made by human beings, not by this measure of money.
I would also add, Diana, you said, how can democracy adopt this? I think one of the things that we're starting to see that does give me some hope is the raising of consciousness, at least here in this country. And I'm thinking from what I've seen to some degree the rest of the world as well, just around the massive inequity that exists between the rich and the poor, and in particular between people of color and the white elite here in this country that have controlled the resources, and where the resources continue to be more centralized and controlled by a very tiny minority. That's becoming more and more clear. It's becoming more and more common knowledge, and folks are starting to see with their own eyes some of the results of that and some of the history of the systemic racism that inequity spawned going back, 300-400 years, and starting to see that with their own eyes as opposed to reading about it in books or papers or hearing about it from advocates like you or me. They're seeing it with their own eyes, and a lot of that, of course, is due to the availability of technology, the smartphone, and the internet that enables the not just the video recording, but the live stream of that recording globally on a live instantaneous basis. I think that is a big factor that is starting to raise consciousness and inform people and kind of open up people's heads to what's going on, and perhaps to looking at new ideas such as universal basic income. And I'm sure that 40 million people out of work here in the United States has forced a lot of rethinking about, what am I doing? What does this job mean to me? Why do I need income, and what do I use it for? And to Eno's other point, which is really the liberating aspect of UBI, I know for myself, and I've seen for others, folks that are out of work and not doing their regular jobs, even though many may be struggling to make ends meet, it's also opened up people's minds and to other opportunity to do other things, to pursue other interests interests that are maybe closer to their heart and closer to their dreams. And I've seen it right in my family. I've seen it with my son, who was working and the job ended, and now he's really embracing some of the things that he has been talking about doing for years. Now he's really doing it, and I'm sure he's not alone. I'm sure that others that are moving along that path as well. So I'm kind of hoping that that's going to be a positive byproduct of this pandemic, that, you know, essentially raising of consciousness, opening up of minds to new ideas, and embracing the fact that there are other things to do in your life other than just go 9 to 5 to pay the rent.
And closer to the demands, the true demand of our people. You know, so many things are produced today without a real necessity or a real demand of people. It's artificially created. And that's what we see by Corona too. We don't have a lack by anything, even if so many companies are closed. So it can be a rethinking, what do we really need? And I guess then we see, yeah, we need a lot of things we don't have, but this is much more interpersonal action. This is much more of personal human services, or this is much more to be accompanied by people who are looking to you, understanding you, giving you a resonance of your life. So that work is not longer on what it was in the last century. Work becomes much more sensitive, has much more to do with awareness of other people, of animals, how they feel, nature. All that stuff has to become or will become our work in the future. So it's not necessary to do things that machines can take over, because our challenge is to develop further on and to become more sensitive to those things we don't see today. Like it was 100 years ago that people didn't see what is necessary for us today. We know it today, but there's also a future. It is rising, it is going on. The demand is changing, what people need is changing. And so what work is will change. And we should be happy that many of this old stuff, old work, old labor is taken over by machines, but everybody needs an income. So income cannot be strictly linked to gainful employment. Then people die with the job that is abolished. So we have to understand people need an income, and that has nothing to do with work. That has to do with living, and living is the basis for acting, for work. Work is my lifetime. You know, I cannot sell my lifetime. This is slavery. We are still in an understanding of work which is very close to slavery. So that I sell my lifetime, and that is part-time slavery. You know, the circumstances are not so bad, the conditions are not so heavily bad like in the time of slavery, but our understanding is the same. And by that reason, yeah, I'm wondering, and maybe that's a question to you, what the Black Lives Matters movement and the civil rights movement, which is led by the Black people primarily, has to do with an unconditional basic income. And I don't know if you know that there's a coalition of mayors in the United States now. I guess it's 12 mayors or so from different cities. And they want to implement basic income in their cities. They know it's not unconditional basic income as the definition of it is. It is a lower amount. It's not for all the people. It's means tested and so on. But then it's unconditional given. So they want to do that. A step to an unconditional basic income around, so connected with Michael Tubbs, mayor of Stockton, where a pilot project already is running. And the daughter of Martin Luther King said, "This is what my father wanted, a guaranteed income for the people." And I think this is very strong when she's saying what my father wanted. So what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wanted is guaranteed income, unconditional basic income. And yeah, my question to you is, how do you see the link or the benefit of civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter, and an unconditional basic income? Is there a connection?
I would think there is, but let me just say for 1 second, you're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, with Diana Blackwell, Eno Schmidt, and Stu Reed, Communiy Technology. And we're talking about UBI and Black Lives Matters. And I think there absolutely is a link between Black Lives Matters and UBI, to answer your question. You talked about slavery, and of course that is the legacy of Black Americans. So we were enslaved here and for 300 plus years. And there's an artist who's not with us anymore, Rahsaan Roland Kirk, who had a song out back in the 70s called Volunteer Slavery. And that was about the very thing that you're talking about. Okay, it may not be slavery. In fact, we may not have the physical shackles, but there's shackles on our minds, there's shackles on our day-to-day behavior. And we are doing the bidding of someone else to build their wealth, to build their company, to build their particular apparatus just to get by. And we still have the company store, although it may be called Walmart's or ShopRite or whatever. Those stores are owned by the behemoths that are in charge of making sure that we toe the line. So in many ways, it's just been a sophisticated evolution from where we were 150 years ago. And so, yes, universal or unconditional basic income would really help to free the minds and the behaviors of Black Americans as well as everyone else. But speaking as a Black American in particular, I think we need that in order to really refocus on our dreams and our aspirations and the things that need to be done to fix this democracy, to fix this country. And as long as we are slaving, that was a term, Diana, you probably remember back in the 60s, there's a term we used to call jobs a slave. I'm going to my slave. It was kind of tongue in cheek, but it's not really. So we need to move away from that volunteer slavery and move towards things that liberate, enrich, and grow us as individuals, as a people, and as a community, as a nation. And I think the Black Lives Matters movement is the beginning of a focus on how important the individual life is, how important individual freedom is. And also looking at the legacy of oppression and the lack of freedom, lack of opportunities that have existed for Black and brown people for so many centuries. Is forcing white America and the rest of the world to look at us as Black and brown people. We're not learning anything. We've known all about this all our lives and before, but the rest of the world is waking up and seeing exactly the conditions under which we have lived and currently live. And I think that will help not only us, but help them as well. Diana, you look like you wanted to chime in on that. Yeah, unmute yourself, Diana.
Sorry. Yeah, I would like to say that because we have lacked so much, I'll say economically, we've not fulfilled what is deep within us. And I believe that we are naturally architects, we're designers, we're farmers, we're a total person. And the moment that we can economically be sound, we will begin to build our community in a manner that we have not seen in ages. That's what I'm looking for UBI to do, to help us begin to create ourselves again, rebuild ourselves. We were not always the poor man on the totem pole, the last man on the totem pole. We used to be heads of many things, and we've fallen from that. And it's basically because there is no economical system that we can depend on. We're always looking for a help or a handout. We need something that will give us that vision back, that will instill within us something that is worth us fighting for. not fighting one another, but fighting to, establish ourselves. And I believe this is what UBI would do.
There has been a suggestion that there should be an unconditional basic income, universal basic income, but it should be higher for Black people because of a compensation for all that what is not given them, because they built up the country, they didn't get that benefits from that. So an unconditional basic income, but higher for Black people than for white and the rest of the people. It's a suggestion from Dorian Byrne from the an institute in New York. I'm not sure about it. What do you think about that? He's from
Well,
Roosevelt.
I would certainly agree that Black folks for 400 years were not involved in the economic system, except to the extent that we built this system to the benefit of the folks that now own it and that are reaping the benefits. We built the system, and just to your point, Diana, we've always been builders. We were builders in ancient Africa, back in our homeland of incredible empires and civilizations. And then even after we were enslaved, we became the builders over here and built this country, built this industry, built the agricultural industry, built the textile industry, built a lot of the industrial base of this country, and have been excluded from the benefits of those things that we built. So now, we're being asked to catch up after 400 years of being denied. So, even though it's to some folks it's a difficult sell politically, but I would agree with you, that there should be some special compensation, dispensation for the 400 years of lack of equity and income that Black Americans have had to live through. You have white Americans that don't understand that don't see that the legacy, how that legacy has and continues to handicap us. They think, well, everything is equal now, everything is available to you now. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that you guys have a 400-year head start, and families and industries have had a chance to build up equity in terms of business, in terms of real estate, in terms of homes, in terms of the property that we have been excluded from. And even when we were freed, we were excluded from those opportunities. And even when we were able to build up communities and businesses, white folks did things like what happened in Tulsa. They came in and destroyed and bombed it. And Tulsa was just one of many examples where that happened in the early 20th century as a result of Black advances. White folks couldn't take it and they destroyed it. So we've been behind the 8 ball from the very beginning. And then, after World War II, there was all this special legislation here in the United States to provide for loans, FHA loans, homeowner loans for returning GI veterans. But guess what? Black folks were excluded from that. Even GIs that fought and died in the war for America were excluded from that. And then later, when some of that financing opened up, then they further redlined us and relegated us to certain poor communities when and if we could get financing to even live in those. So we've been behind the 8 ball economically, since the 1600s, and it's the playing field is not even level yet today, but there is so much catching up that needs to happen. Back to Eno's question, yes, I think there should be reparations. Yes, I think there should be something special for Black Americans in terms of equity. Diana, would you agree with any of that, or am I talking out of school? Diana?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. I'm having troubles with this machine today. No, you're absolutely right. I believe when we're talking about equity, it might have to be through a reparation at first. Put us on an even playing field, and then let us go forward. I'm going to switch over. I would like to know, you are really into UBI. How is it going with Mayor Tubbs? We're talking about equity. How is it going with Mayor Tubbs in his area of California, Stockton, California, where he's been on an 18-month trial with a form of UBI, bringing some of the low-income people up to a better living standard?
Yeah, that's running very well. I don't have precise detailed information about the last times, but it's running very well. Like all the test programs are very well. So the amount is $500, I guess, for an individual, and it's around about 100 people. And well, you can imagine that helps the people, and that makes for the people what we said in this show. People are encouraged, people feel better, less stress, more health, better relationship, less violence. All that stuff is coming from that. So it's so simple. If people are permanently in stress, threatened by survival, what can you expect from the people? So people need to have a secure home and a secure life, and then people act good. So, and that's much better for the society. It's not just for them themselves, it is for the whole society. It's better for the children when the parents is a little bit more relaxed, having a little bit more time for the children. It's better for all the neighbors. It's better for the products they are creating. It's better for everything. It's better to be human than to be unhuman. And to stress people so heavily, so hardly, threaten them by life if you don't do whatever, then you have a society of violence, and you have a society of people who are angry, people who don't experience unconditional love. And that's what, for example, Warren Buffett said. The most important thing in the world is unconditional love. I experienced it by my father. He said, do what you want. If you earn a lot or a little, the important is do it as good as you can with emphasis. That's what I said to you. And he said unconditional love is the most important. So, okay, why not having unconditional love in a society as a basis of the society? What's bad on that? Unconditional basic income, in a way, not in a sentimental way, not in a sweet way, but in a way, truly, it is an unconditional love of the people, each to each other. And that's what's happening in the Stockton program. So not, I made it a little bit as a big picture. It's more um, usual days, but it runs very well. And that's a reason too why so many mayors from other cities want to do the same. And you know what? The mayors in those cities, they have the close experience of the people. They see the people, they know the people, and they know how hard they are suffering. And that is a no-go for the future. So there's more distance from the ordinary people, don't see that. And then talking about those people as they are lazy, they did the wrong decisions, no education, all that stupid stuff, that doesn't matter. It matters if people are suffering. It matters that you are a human being, not what kind of education you have had. And all that talking about you have to do everything right, education, the right steps, and so on, and then you get rich or you are successful. That's not working longer on. And that is the same, and in particular, in my eyes, in the United States, that you have the situation like in the 18th century when people flew from Europe to that free country because there were no hierarchies, no nobilities. It was open. It was open. You could live your life. You could create the society. If you worked hard, if you did things well, then you were successful. But that's no longer true for the United States. That's just a narrative. True is you have to start the next revolution, and hopefully that's not a bloody revolution, but the evolution. You have to recreate America. United States. You have to recreate a free country where everybody has a chance to live his or her life. That is pursuit of happiness. It's not to become rich. It is to fulfill your biography, to live your life. That's That's what was what the meaning in that sentence by the founding fathers. Non-conditional basic income has to do with it.
Well said. Just want to welcome Polly Spain. Hello, Polly.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good, good. Just want to remind our listeners, you're listening to Communiy Technology on WHCR FM 90.3. We are talking about universal basic income with our host, Diana Blackwell, Eno Schmidt, and just joined by Polly Spain. Polly, I don't know if you had a chance to hear any of our earlier conversation, but Eno was just waxing very eloquently, I thought, on how universal basic income is so important here in this country because we are no longer the home of the free and the brave, and the opportunity that Europeans in the 18th and 19th century, the reason that they came over to this country was because you didn't have the caste system of nobility, that everything was open and everything was available and everything was possible. And as Zeno so eloquently stated, that's no longer true. That's the narrative, but it's no longer the truth of how this country operates. I just wondered whether you wanted to chime in on that notion or any other aspect of UBI. That's for you, Polly. Polly, can you hear me? I don't.
Yeah, I think my internet is kind of going in and out.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think you heard something about. You said something to the point that that's no longer the case. That the United States is the home of the brave, and there's opportunity abounding in the nation, and how important universal basic income is now. And I totally agree with that conversation because of the fact that everything's been shut down economically here in New York. I can only speak to that. I imagine throughout the country as well. And so people now have to figure out a new normal, how to do business, shopkeepers, etc. So I just feel that universal basic income now is very important just to kind of maintain and sustain some semblance of, being able to buy and sell goods and services. And people trying to figure out, what do I do? I just came from Broadway in my area, and they have this thing now where your restaurants, can expand their space, the seating space, so everyone's outside. It's a nice feeling, but when it's raining and when the winter comes, I don't know how that's going to work. So you're going to have a lot of mom and pop stores that are out of business. And for New York, that was kind of like the driving force, is that, a person was able to open up a business and then people would patronize. It really built up communities and neighborhoods. Okay. So I do feel that universal basic income is a solution. And that it should be something that people think about now, not wait until later on. The virus is not going anywhere. I don't care what anyone says. Even if they come up with a vaccine, it still has to be tested, etc. People still need goods and services, and they still need something, I guess, to seal the deal, so to speak, when it comes to doing transactions. So I just think we're being forced, whether we like it or not, to embrace it, that mindset. And the government, I feel, needs to get on board with it because they have plenty of, to me, economic structures in place to support universal basic income. And as we said earlier, it's not a handout, okay, at all. Because as we talked about in our last meeting, people should have the human right to fulfill whatever innate gifts and abilities they were born with. And so people are discovering that on their own. They're being very creative in response to the virus now. A lot of businesses are starting up and people are putting that step out there and saying, I'm not just going to sit around idly, and wait for the government or corporate America to decide my fate. So they're figuring out on their own and working with others cooperatively, to make things happen. So I see a lot of positive aspects to what's going on in our new reality. Okay. I just feel as human beings now, we're gonna, figure it out. We're not gonna go traditional. They were just talking about schools being open in September. All right. That's not going to happen in the way it was set up before. So they have no other choice but to migrate to a digital environment, to deliver educational services. But to me, this virus has taught everyone a lesson because I think we were too complacent in so many aspects of our lives. Okay. And so now I just feel that we are all forced individually to look at our lives individually and as a collective in a different light. Okay. Because this could happen again. We're still not through this, but we just can't take life for granted anymore and just go by the average way that we've been existing, put it that way. And so I'm glad that we're having this discussion. Maybe more people, will think about it and really start finding ways, to embrace it.
Very insightful, Polly. Just before you came on, we were saying some of the same things about how how the pandemic has given people a chance to pause in their lives, and the unemployment aspect has given people to think about what it is that they want to do with their lives and what does work mean to them, and what are some alternative ways to survive and make income other than just the typical 9 to 5. And I want to welcome Lena Marvin. Lena just joining us. Hi, Lena.
Hello, hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Excited to join the conversation.
Yeah. We came on early. We come on early on when we have our UBI show, partly accommodate Dr. Schmidt, who's I think 5 or 6 hours ahead of us. So what time is it where you are right now? It's 11
6
o'clock.
hours ahead. Yeah, it's 11 minutes after 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
In the PM.
Good time.
So we
So
started.
you're 6 hours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
6 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Polly, may I ask you one question? We said also that the society will become much more resilient with an unconditional basic income. But we have had the question of what is the link between UBI and Black Lives Matters, the civil rights movement, which is led by the Black people, the idea of Martin Luther King of a guaranteed income, and how can we figure out a little bit more clearly the link between UBI and this situation where Black Lives Matters is coming from and civil rights movement. Do you have any idea? So Stu said something about that, but I would like to hear some words from you too about.
I just feel that the Black Lives Matters movement is just a reflection of issues that have been happening prior to the pandemic. And the pandemic has afforded, along with what happened, with the situation in Missouri and throughout the nation, I just feel that social media has brought a lot of truths to the light that would not have been made aware of on a national landscape. Because if you notice, most of the people here in New York who are in the forefront of the Black Lives Movement are high school students, college age students. So that's like the new generation, okay? And to tie that in with civil rights, so we're talking about civil rights from the 60s. This is a generation, 2 generations later, okay? Yeah. And to me, it's like they're picking up the mantle, okay, and ushering a new direction when it comes to civil rights, because it's not so much just the civil rights based on color or being able to eat at a restaurant. It's civil rights as far as quality of life, okay? That generation, which I do work with, they're no longer accepting, okay, what the government says, or, if somebody says, well, your pattern is to go to school, you go to college, you go to work 30 years, they're not accepting that, because I work with that age group. And they're always telling me, oh, Miss Fain, the world is messed up, and they're not happy internally. And instinctively inside of them, there's a light that's coming forward saying, this is not right. They may not be able to verbalize it specifically in a technical way, the way we might have discussions and conversations, but spiritually and instinctively, the feedback that I've gotten from that generation is that we're not accepting, what prior generations have done. We're not out there because we just want to be out there yelling and screaming. We want change, because for them, they see a terminal cycle of death constantly, being surrounded by violence, being, and not just coming from the police, just in the communities. All right. And they're saying that the traditional pattern that they've been taught and programmed to be a part of, which is you get a job, you get married, you have kids, or you go to college, that's not working for them anymore, because they saw what their parents and grandparents went through, and they see that they're not content. They want to be content, you see. And what they have on their side is they grew up with technology, the internet, social media. So they're talking to each other, you see. They're getting what I call instant truth right away. And then they're communicating with each other. And they're thinking at the same time. And they're more into caring about each other. I mean, the group that I've worked with, like I said, worked with young people for over 10 years. And so I've watched that generation grow, right? So I've worked with the generation from the 90s. And so this generation now, they were born in 2000. That's who's out there now. Okay, they don't know our world that we lived in without internet, without cell phone. Okay, so they're getting rapid information and they're processing the information faster. They're absorbing it like a sponge. So with this civil rights movement, it's not, to me, based on race. It's based on human civil rights for humanity. Okay.
So I think one thing that's interesting about how Black Lives Matter has been presented, I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, so it's kind of an interesting.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. Is that part of it is an argument against systemic white supremacy that's inside of structures. So in St. Louis, there's a lot of, it's a very different housing situation than New York City, where people don't, like most people who don't have money can't even think about owning in New York City. But in St. Louis, if you're poor, you can own a house. It's just not going to be a good house or in a good neighborhood. What UBI offers in that case is if UBI existed, there are currently can't own, but could own if it wasn't for that poverty is so expensive. Once you're poor, there's this constant drop where you need money to have money. Like it just keeps, the cost of being poor is very high. You can't buy a good car. You have to buy a cheap car. If you buy a cheap car, you have to keep paying to get it to keep it running. And it gets trapped in these cycles of poverty. So when I have heard discussions of what is Black Lives Matter, the link between the white supremacy of property ownership has been a part of that discussion. And I do think that universal basic income could interrupt that, that tragedy.
Okay, so as I said earlier, for the generation that I've been dealing with, okay, the feedback that I'm getting is that they're looking at the world, that's just part of the Black Lives Matter, but the young Blacks and Latinos that I've dealt with and I speak to, basically their whole issue is looking at the world globally, and they're seeing death all around them, right? So they're deciding at a young age, what kind of world is this? What is the point in going after the house that you're talking about? Okay. And that image of what a life should be, when all they're seeing is death around them, whether it's from gang violence, whether it's the police, you talk about the white supremacy, that might be part of the issue. But a lot of people who live in poverty, because that's who I deal with, are young people who are in poverty, okay? They don't worship the almighty dollar like other groups do, okay? They're more interested in a quality of life, being able to walk down the street safely, fall in love, that's what they're dealing with, all right? Because to them, a lot of them don't look at themselves as I'm in poverty and I'm hopeless. They don't have that mentality, because I've seen them be very creative and take nothing and make something out of it, Okay. And so they use different ways, to create finance for their self. All right. But what I'm saying to you is they're not buying into the system the way it's set up. That's why a lot of them say, about voting. What's the point in voting when I know my vote doesn't make a difference and it's fixed? That's what their mind is telling them. They're not willing to serve in the military because they say, I'm not going to die for an issue I don't believe in. You understand? They're more focused on, okay, how can I take care of my family? And they have these big hearts because most of the poor young people that I've dealt with, they've already suffered so many challenges by the time they're 10 years old. Okay. So they're no longer dealing with the issue of, I want to be rich. No, they're not interested in being rich or having money. They just want to be able to live healthy, to live in peace. That's what they want. That's the kind of world that they want. And to have the freedom to make choices that are going to make them happy. They're more into peace of mind and happiness, okay? Because they understand that the material world means nothing. Because if you're dead, they know you can't take it with you because they've seen friends die at 9 and 8 and 10 years old. So to them, they know that's real. Okay. So for them, they're already way ahead of the game because they're saying what I want is a better quality of life. Okay. So that whole thing where, some, I'm not saying all, okay, the whole language about white supremacy, I don't think that's the way to really label it, to be honest with you, because they don't look at anybody white as being supreme to them. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead.
So I didn't mean, so there's certain economic inequalities that have been baked into St. Louis. Now it's not
okay.
New York in the same way. So redlining for property ownership has impacted a lot of places, and there's this this history of property and ownership, and what is a Black neighborhood and what is a white neighborhood, and how are schools funded, and where do people go? So when I say when I say the history of white supremacy, that it's baked into some of the racist structures, I didn't mean, well, regardless, it's a different quality of life when you're looking at, can I pay my rent or can I pay a mortgage? And what is the meaning of control of a neighborhood? So in St. Louis, the divide is white people own, Black people rent.
Okay.
I think that UBI in St. Louis, but not in New York, change that dynamic. So if you look at Ferguson, part of what's interesting in Ferguson, people don't know this, Ferguson is an incredibly cute community. Like the houses are cute, the buildings are cute, they have little ice cream parlors. Like it's a nice neighborhood, it's a nice place. Part of why people rioted is because it was this outside police brutality that was hurting their neighborhood and hurting them. And I do think that universal basic income allowing for greater ownership of the Black community in St. Louis, it's a different situation, but that was just how I was trying to link it to UBI. But I think the question of what does quality of life look like in different places is really interesting. Like
It is. You're absolutely right. From that perspective, if that's the mindset, what you're talking about in Missouri, it's definitely different from the mindset of the youth here in New York. Okay. I don't know. So I can understand why, you say what you say based on that.
Well, New York has stronger neighborhood engagement in a lot of ways. It's easier to. I don't know about the shape of white flight and New York communities the same way, but like also what's the shape of gentrification? I worry with universal basic income in New York that the landlords will just keep taking, but I think that's part of what's beautiful about universal basic income is that you might actually see people leaving places that aren't funded, that they don't have the infrastructure they want, or to create the infrastructure they want, which is like more of what happens in New York, is people create the communities they want, even if they have limited means to do that.
Exactly, and that's my point. You know, they people are creative. I find that with the universal basic income, what it would do is be a tool to empower the Black Lives Matters movement so that people can now use that as a tool to migrate to whatever quality of life that they wish to create. Because, you know, I'm just like sitting back observing, to be honest with you. And I find that because when you're born poor and in poverty, basically right now this situation is nothing. You know, like people who have, they're the ones who are panicking because it's their system that's breaking down, not the system of poor people who are in poverty or the Black or Latin community. Okay, because we've always known how to, again, make something out of nothing. So we're not in panic mode because we know how to get out here and hustle, so to speak, and, you know, make ends meet from nothing. So it's the people who have, that are afraid, who are, you know, committing suicide and killing themselves. And what am I going to do? You know, Wall Street is in a panic. All the, you know, I call the titans, they're in a panic because they're the ones that have to figure out, you know. So that's why it's going to be interesting. You understand what I'm saying? Because they might be the ones who will embrace UBI faster than somebody who's been poor, because they need to have something to replace the system that they've known. But we've always had universal basic income amongst each other, you know, because if I always shared with somebody who didn't have. That's how we've been able to survive for centuries here in the United States, you know. Slaves have been able to survive because they had each other. Okay. So if you want to tie that in, I don't know if Enos is still on, but with the civil rights movement, I just feel that universal basic income will just be another tool to empower and usher in a civil rights movement for humanity, you know. And I do feel that the Black Lives Matter movement is great because, again, you know, you're seeing people working together from all walks of life, and they all want the same thing. You know, I think that's the real message. All right. And people now, and the system is being forced now to change, where, you know, and do it faster. Okay. I mean, here in New York, I can't speak for other states, but I know the state legislators have written a lot of laws, you know, to deal with the situation regarding the police and, you know, our elected officials, and, you know, so many groups are forming to create task force to see how we can change things. So I think it's good, you know. I think it's been a good thing. So, but I like to hear more about Missouri because you're right there, like, you know.
Okay, well,
Do you think
unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I would ask everyone to give us a final statement or summation of whether we need to reconvene this group again, because this is fascinating. We could easily talk for another hour, so let's do this again real soon. But final comments, you know.
Well, I'm happy about what your discussion was, Helena and Polly, because that makes clear what I think is the fact that the patterns are changing. The pattern of what is a lucky life and what is desirable, a car, a house, and things like that is going. That's the patterns of the last century, and it still is living. But this is very important. I think an unconditional basic income is not just a nice idea. It's not an ideology. It is what fits to the mentality of the people, like they develop in future. They don't want to have all that stuff. They want to have their lives, you know, and creativity is at the top. And you gave that argument too, Polly, what I was mentioning for Diana, who were asking for equality and justice in a way between rich and poor. And I said, an unconditional basic income don't create equality that way. It gives the basis to act for it, to act what you want to act for. If that is a huge problem for you, justice and inequality, you can engage yourself to change the situation. And that was very interesting for me that you made the decision, made the difference between civil rights movement and Black Lives Matter. And this is a new generation. And this is about how life is. And an unconditional basic income gives a basis to do it. So thank you very much.
Okay, Diana, you have some final words for us?
Yeah, I would like to say that, what I've heard at the very end kind of sums up our talk for today, which is based on UBI versus BLM, Black Lives Matter. And it seems that in order to obtain this quality of life, we do need two other things added: an economic background and equity. And with that, I believe we could definitely change the shape of the future of the Black lives. Both need,
Lena,
yeah.
okay, Lena, you have some final comments?
I'm so sorry, I missed the first part. No,
Okay, Polly, you have the last word.
Well, as I said, earlier, to me, universal basic income is basically a tool, and I look at it as ushering in a new dynamic for humanity. And I think it's very important. I think that we're, together, society, and I'm talking about globally, is changing before our eyes. And I do feel that before long, it'll be something that'll be ingrained in our everyday lives. I just think that it's going to take a life of its own, to be honest with you.
Okay, well, thank you all. Diana Blackwell, Polly Spain, Alina Marvin, Eno Schmidt. You've been listening to Community and Technology on WHR 90.3 FM. Stay tuned next week for a more lively discussion from Community and Technology. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Good night.